Oh, I know you guys were waiting for this review. This is the first generation Kohler Wellworth or Highline pressure Lite toilets. Made since the late 1980s or early 1990s up until the mid 2000s. Now, Kohler is well known for having so many infamous disasters. The Wellworth Lite, the Kohler High Crest, practically every class 5 in existence. But this is easily among some of the worst toilets they have ever made. The pressure Lites of the first generation. Today we're going to be mostly covering the Wellworth and Highline models. There is a Barrington version, but I'll cover that another day, which, fun fact, is still made in standard height in the first generation. But that's a review for another day. Let's talk about why these things are some infamous disasters, and one of the worst pressure system toilets ever made. Beginning with the overall design, not really much to write home about in regards to the bulb, but I gotta say the tank is kinda hideous. It also has a very strange handle too, which is very weird looking. Now, obviously the fatter tank is supposed to accommodate for some of the older pressure vessels like the 501A and B, and eventually they would move on to the 503s in the 2000s. The Trapway opening is a standard trapezoid shaped opening, although it is a little small looking. It also has a very small siphon jet in the middle. So here we got a standard 503. This one's obviously a replacement. Who knows what this has? Probably a 501B that was, of course, recalled. And then eventually in the 2000s, the 503s made during that time period were also recalled. So that's a great sign when you have not only an awful toilet, but you have a ticking time bomb in one of the tanks. I don't know much about the 501As, but the 501Bs and the early 503s were infamous for blowing up. That's nice. Let's have a look at a flush. It's both very crappy and very long. One of the most infamous things about this toilet is the loudness. In a very echoey restroom, it can be very ear-piercingly loud, and that's often a complaint most people have about these toilets. But it's not the only thing, I promise you that. The pulling factor on these things absolutely suck. Not only are these things infamous for getting things stuck to the rim because of the god-awful ball rents, but these things are well known for shredding as well. That just tells you everything you need to know about this toilet. If the rinse was a little bit better, it might be slightly improved, but the shredding would definitely be a problem still. This thing is also a pretty bad performer too. It's not as bad as say something like the Kohler High Crest, but due to the smaller opening, this thing can clog every now and then. It's not a very great performer, which is embarrassing considering this thing has a fairly large trapway, 2 1/4 inches might I add. But due to the small opening, the performance is pretty bad. And now for the truly infamous part, the bowl rinse. Yeah, the rinse is horrendous. And I can easily explain why that is. Someone actually showed a video of one of these without the tank, and there's only a small little hole that feeds the rim jets. That explains why most of the water goes to the siphon jet and why the flushes tend to be long, because the rim is rarely utilized due to the small hole. These things have some of the worst bowl runs of a pressure system I've ever seen. They stick everywhere. The front, the back. I've even seen toilet paper get stuck due to the horrendous bowl rinse. And that also affects the pulling factor as well, considering that if stuff gets stuck to the rim, well, there isn't any bowl wash to wash it down, so it's stuck there. Here's another angle. And that is the first generation Kohler Wellworth and Highline pressure Lite toilets. Among some of the worst pressure assisted toilets ever made, There are plenty of garbage pressure-assisted toilets out there, but this is easily among one of the worst. It's offered with 1.6 gallons, yet it can barely do the bare minimum. These things shred like crazy, and these things are infamous for having god-awful ball rinses and flushes. It's easy to see why these things are so rare, because who would want to put up with one of these things? It's worthless. But let's put this toilet into the grading scale. Let's grade this abomination.
The design of this is nothing special at first until you get to the tank. The tank just looks stupid. I'm sorry, I can't get over how stupid this tank looks. Overall, I give the design a 4. The flush mates mostly consist of 501As, 500s, 501Bs, and eventually 503s for the latter years. Let's just say 2 out of 4 have been recalled. And not to mention, they are the most common flush mates that you would find in these toilets. So, safe to say, half of the time, you'll likely get a ticking time bomb. If even that. The flush mates get a 2. You guys are probably expecting me to tear into the quality control of this, but most of this has to do with some obvious design flaws, mostly with the rim. Excluding that, the quality control is still crap, with the performance and the pulling factor being the biggest problems. Despite the fact that the flushes are generally long due to the terrible design of the ball itself, it still manages to shred a lot. And that right there is something special. The quality control gets a 3. The trapway on the side looks fairly competent until you get to the trapway opening, which looks very small. The trapway opening is easily the worst part of this trapway, and it gets a 4 because of it. I don't think I was really too harsh on the flush, was I? The flush sucks! Even when this thing does have functioning rim jets, which is a rarity, the flush still manages to suck altogether. Most of the time the flush is way too long because most of the water goes straight to the siphon jet, and not to mention that it's irritatingly loud. I'm not taking away just for loudest, but generally speaking, the flush sucks. It gets a 2. It should be no shock that the pulling factor sucks on this. Ignoring the horrendous ball rinse, this thing is pretty well known for shredding constantly. Even when the rim jets are actually functioning, the pulling factor is still pretty terrible as this thing shreds a lot. Keep in mind, most of these do have long flushes due to most of the water going to the siphon jet, but even despite all that, this thing still manages to shred a lot. Honestly speaking, the fact that this thing can have a long flush and still shred frequently is quite impressive. In all the wrong ways. Safe to say this is getting a 2. So, it should be also no shock that the performance is bad. This thing has a 2.25-inch trapway, but due to the trapway opening, that's where most of the clogs happen. It's nowhere near as terrible as the Kohler High Crest, but it's still bad. It gets a 4. You know, the one thing I've been pondering about is that I want to give the ball rinse, unironically, a 0. I came close to giving this thing a 0, but ultimately I decided I'm not giving it a 0 because there's something that would probably take the 0 score more seriously. That doesn't mean that the ball rinse isn't god-awful. There are many different problems for why the ball rinse is so horrendous. 1. The design of the bowl. Some of you may not know, but there's only a small little hole that feeds the rim jets. Meanwhile, the rest of it goes to the siphon jet, which explains why most of these flush very long. Number 2, the rim jets are pointed down. As if the fact that the rim jets are rarely utilized, they are not covering the bowl very greatly either. I mean, do I really need to say anything more about this quote-unquote bowl rinse? Just look at it. It's easily the worst bowl rinse I've ever seen on a pressure-assisted toilet. And keep in mind, most pressure-assisted toilets tend to have terrible and crappy bowl rinses. But this is the cream of the crap right here. This gets a 1. In combination with all the horrendous qualities, as well as a ticking time bomb half of the time, safe to say these things are practically going extinct. Good! That is great news! Unless you're an owner of one of these toilets. The survivability is easily a 2. Okay, let's talk about the overall value of this toilet, which does not exist. There is so much to digest with this toilet, and it's not even funny. I have never seen so many horrendous qualities on a pressure assisted toilet. Like, this is beyond the bottom of the barrel at this point. There are so many terrible qualities about this thing, it's not even funny. The flush is terrible, the pulling factor is terrible, the ball rinse is almost non-existent, even the performance is still bad. And as if these things were not worthless already, these things have ticking time bombs most of the time. Which, if the quality wasn't the only problem this thing has, that's also another problem. I've seen my fair share of terrible and borderline worthless pressure-assisted toilets, but this is easily the cream of the crap right here. This is beyond the bottom of the barrel, and it's not even close. This is easily one of the worst pressure-assisted toilets ever made. And the fact that they never fixed this design, ever, throughout its run, is embarrassing. Safe to say, the value easily is a 1. The final score of the first generation Kohler, Wellworth, and Highline Pressure Lite toilets is a 25 out of 100. It's no wonder why this thing is so stinking rare. Because it's worthless. This thing has so many flaws it's not even funny, and the fact that they've never improved it at all throughout its run, and even its Barrington model that's still made to this day still has the same exact problems, if not worse, is embarrassing. We can only wish that these things slowly go extinct faster.